This is part 4 of the 4-part video series constructing the Lego Robot Educator driving base. In this part, we will complete the construction of the driving base, including the brick assembly and wheels, and then joining the cables. This video encompasses steps 32 through 44. In step 32, we have 4 parts, 4 pegs with friction. Those are the little short friction pegs. And I also have my robot assembly on the table in front of me. The power joint with its ball is on the table and it's next to me. And then above that, I can feel the plug-ins for the 2 motors on the left and right motor. And then since it's upright in the front on the beam frame that is sitting in a vertical position, there are 2 pegs that are sticking up from that beam frame. Now we'll take 2 of the connector pegs and put them on the left motor, and 2 of them will go on the right motor. And let's start by doing the right motor. So I'm going to just tip this up slightly, and if on the right motor, if you locate where the plug is, then right above that you will find 3 connector holes right in a row. And we're going to take one of the connector pegs and put it in the center hole. And then we'll put the other connector peg for the right motor on the hole to the left, the one that's closest to the center of our robot assembly, so that we end up with an empty hole on the outside right. We'll do this symmetrically on the left motor assembly. So again, find the plug. There are 3 holes above that. We're going to leave the hole on the far left empty. We'll put a peg in the center hole, and then a peg in the hole on the right closest to the center of our robot. So those 4 pegs are now in. In step 33, we have 3 parts, 1 5M beam, and 2 of the 2x1 cross beams. We're going to take that 5M beam, and it's going to be added where we just put those pegs in on the previous step. Now, if you hold that up next to those pegs on the back, you will see, and you center it on the assembly, you will see that the end holes of that 5M beam will go on the last peg closest to the center on each of the motors. And that will leave us with 1 empty peg sticking out on each side. So you have a 5M beam now connecting the 2 motors at the top. Next we'll add the 2 cross beams. Take one of them and hold it so that one of the holes is facing up and one of the holes is facing towards you. And then the hole that is facing towards you, it's on the bottom, and we're going to slide that onto the peg that is directly above the plug. I'll start with the right side, so I'm going to slide that hole onto that peg, and so the other hole of that cross beam sticks out towards the front of the robot. I'll do the same thing with the other one. I'm holding it so one of the holes is facing up, one of the holes is facing towards me, and then I'll slide that hole that's facing towards me, that's on the bottom, onto the peg on the left motor, right above the plug, and it'll slide forward so that the backs are flush with the 5M beam that we added, and the fronts face towards the front of the robot assembly. Step 34 has 2 parts. They are 2 pegs with friction, And each peg is going to go into the top hole of that cross beam that we just added towards the back of the motor. So put one on the top of the cross beam on the left motor and one on the cross beam on the top of the right motor. So now we have two pegs facing up on the back side of our robot assembly that's closest to us, and we have two pegs facing up on the front of our robot assembly. We're just about ready to add our brick to the robot, and before we do, we want to make sure that we have our battery pack or our rechargeable battery attached to the bottom of the robot, and it's ready to go. So that's step 35, just to check to make sure you have a battery pack or the rechargeable battery attached to your brick. In step 36, we will attach the brick to our robot assembly. Now let's first look at the bottom of the brick. I have it oriented so that the part with the screen is furthest away from me. The part with the screen is going to go towards the front of the robot. So we're going to turn it over. And if you see on the bottom, on both the front and the back, there are two sets of connectors that have 3 holes in them on both the front and the back. And we're going to put the pegs that we have sticking up on our robot into some of those holes. So on the back end of the brick, the end that's furthest away from the screen, the holes that we will use are the outermost holes. So on the back end, the end away from the screen, we will use the outermost holes. And on the end that's closest to the screen, on each one of those connectors, we will use the center holes. The center holes will connect into our pegs. And so I like to do one set at a time. I've just picked up my brick. I have it oriented so the screen is away from me, and so the back of the brick is towards me, and on the 2 pegs that are sticking up, I will align those with the 2 outside holes on my brick on the bottom there. Just have to move it around a little bit until things fit in properly. Once you get those in, you can turn the whole unit around. And then the pegs on the front, they should be aligning with the center holes on the bottom connectors on the other side of your robot. And then the brick is nicely attached onto the robot. In step 37, we will add 3 pieces. First, we have a peg with friction. Then we have 1 friction cross-axle connector. And then finally, a double angular beam that is 3 by 7. I'm going to start by taking that double angular beam and orienting it so that the long side is vertical and the short side is closest to me and facing off to the right. So long side vertical, short side facing off to the right. Then I'll take my friction cross axle connector, the end with the axle, the cross, and put that in that topmost hole of the long side that's furthest away from me. Just press that axle connector into there, and then we'll skip a hole and then put in the friction peg. This unit is going to attach to the right side of our robot, so let's take a look at where it will go. I've turned the robot so the front is to my right. The power joint with the steel ball is on my left, and I'm going to turn it on its side. I'm kind of supporting it because the axles won't allow it to sit flat on the table. So when we look, well, first let's look at the brick. And on the brick, there are 2 sets of holes. They're in L shapes. The set that's nearest to the front, the L one leg is vertical and the other leg is at the top and points off to the left. And the set that's on the back, one leg is vertical and the top 3 holes point towards the front or to the right. So we have those sets of holes on the brick, and the piece that we just made is going to connect to the vertical holes next to the front end of the brick. So closest on the right, those 3 holes. The top connector will go in the corner hole on the top, and the bottom connector that we added will go into the bottom hole on that area. And then there's one other place that we will connect the double angular beam, and that is down closer to the motor. If you come into underneath the brick, there's a space, and then you run into a beam that's been attached to the motor, and there are 2 pegs sticking out from there. One is an axle peg, you can feel the cross on that, and then there's a space, and then there's a friction peg. And those 2 pegs are going to be attached to the 3 side of our double angular beam. So now we know where we're aiming. We're aiming towards, on the brick, towards the vertical holes that are next to the front on the right, and then the short side on the bottom is going to go into that axle pin and the friction peg that is nearest to the motor. So I'm going to take my double angular beam that I added my 2 pegs to, and I'm going to orient it so that those 2 pegs are facing down towards my table, and now the longer side is vertical and the short side is horizontal and pointing towards the left. And I'll start by connecting the top pins up to the brick. That top pin goes into the corner, the bottom one goes into the bottom hole, and then it should fall right into line with those 2 pegs sticking out from the motor assembly. So just push those in down there till you feel a snap, and then kind of give everything a good push and make sure it's nice and attached. And that'll give some stability to the brick. In step 38, we will add one of our wheels, and the wheel consists of a tire and a rim, and if your tire and rim are separate, just go ahead and put the rim inside of the tire and make sure that it all is fitting in there nicely. Check both sides to make sure that the rim is fitting well into the tire. Once you have that wheel put together, take a look at the center of it, and in the center you feel that one side has a cross and the other side is round and it does not have the cross. And it's that round side that we will place on the axle that is coming out of the drive head. So I'm still working on the right side of my robot. The power joint is on my left, and I found the round area of the drive head. I'm putting the center of that wheel on there and just kind of turning it around until the cross axle is lining up. And you'll need to put your thumb on the other side of the drive head to hold that 8M axle in place while you press the wheel together. So make sure on the inside of the motor that the end stop of that 8M axle is flush up against the drive head. In step 39, we'll add one of the pointers. Sometimes they're called bionicle eyes. We're going to add one of those to the axle that is sticking out of our wheel, and then just put your thumb underneath the end stop on the inside so you can push that little pointer in place. And we put the flat side next to the wheel. Now steps 40 through 42, we're going to repeat this whole process on the left side. So I'm going to take my robot assembly and I'm turning it so that the side with the wheel is now facing down and my power joint is off to the right. And now I'll get my pieces for step 40. I have a double angular beam that's 3 by 7. I have a peg with friction, and I have a friction cross axle connector. I'll take my double angular beam and I'll orient it so that the long side is vertical and the short side is closest to me and it's pointing off to the left. Short side close to me, pointing off to the left. And on the top, furthest away from me, in that cross that is at the very end, I'm going to add the cross from my friction cross axle connector. Push that in, and then I'm going to skip a hole and put in my friction peg. And then I'm going to just flip this unit over so that the pegs are now facing down towards my table, and the short side is still closest to me, but now it's pointing towards the right. Now let's look on our robot and see where this is going to connect. Again, up here on the brick, we have an L-shaped series of holes on the front and the back. On the front, you have a vertical set of 3 holes, and then at the top there are 3 holes that go off towards the right. And on the back set of holes, there are 3 holes that are vertical, and the top holes go to the left. We are going to be using the holes next to the front of the robot, which is the left in this case, and the top peg on our double angular beam is going to go into the corner hole, and then the next peg will go into the bottom hole up there on the brick. And then again, underneath the brick there's a space, and then sitting on top of the motor is another angular beam, and you can feel 2 pegs coming out of there. Those 2 pegs will go into the 3 side on our double angular beam. The peg that is closest to the back on the right side is a cross, and the hole that is on the end of our double angular beam is also a cross hole, so that will fit right on there. Again, I'll start by putting my double angular beam into the top holes on the brick, putting that one into the corner. When I get those in, the other 2 that are next to the motor should align, and I can support that and make that connection, and everything should be good and tight there. In step 41, we will again add a wheel. If your wheel is still in 2 parts, the tire and the rim, go ahead and put the rim inside of the tire and then feel around on both sides to make sure that that tire and rim are together nicely. And then remember that the center of our wheel has a round hole on one side and a cross hole on the other side. When we add this to our axle that's coming out of the drive head, we will put the round side on first. Support the axle with your hand underneath the other side of the drive head and rotate that wheel till the cross hole lines up with the axle, and then push it in place. Make sure you push up from the inside so that that 8M axle with the end stop is flush against the drive head. And then finally we'll take our pointer or bionicle eye and we will add it on to the axle that is sticking out, and we put the flat side next to the wheel. It doesn't matter now which way that pointer is facing. Our driving base is basically complete at this point. The only thing we have left to do is attach cables from the brick to each of the motors. So we'll start with the motor on the left, and I have my robot oriented so the back is facing towards me. That means the power joint with its steel ball is closest towards me. And I've got a 14-inch cable, and I have the cable oriented so the little clip is facing up, and I'm going to insert that clip into the back of the left motor until I hear that click, and then I'll take the cable around to the front of the motor, and you can thread it underneath the brick so that it's not sticking out so much if you want to. And then now I've turned the robot all the way around, so now the front is facing me. And when the front is facing, there are on the brick there are 4 holes, and they're lettered A, B, C, and D. The A is the furthest one on the right. And we're going to take this cable and we're going to put it into the B spot. And remember, again, our little clip needs to be facing up, so you might need to turn it around and then push it in until you hear that click. So we skipped the first spot, which is A, and we have it in the second port, which is B. Now for step 44, we're going to attach the other cable. I'll turn the robot again around so that I have the back facing towards me with the motor ports, and I'll take another 14-inch cable, again with the clip facing up, and push it into the port on the back of the right motor. Turn the robot around. Again, I'm going to thread this cable just underneath the brick a little bit, just so it's kind of out of the way. And then again, the clip should be facing up, and this one will go into port C. So the port C is to the left of port B that we already have a cable in, and there's one empty one on the left, which is D. So when we have our cables in, we should have an empty spot on both the left and right, and we should have cables for our motors going into B and C. Now I'll just turn the whole unit around, and that is our driving base, and it's ready to go.